When my parents demanded that I hand over $25,000 to my sister for IVF, it wasn't just about the money. It was the culmination of years of lies, favoritism, and betrayal. So, instead, I made a different choice. I cut them off. I'm 29, and my older sister, Schwell, 30, has been the golden child her entire life. Not because of any achievements, no, Schwell is, for lack of a better word, a walking disaster. But my parents adored her, almost as if I was a shadow in their perfect little world. From the moment I could remember, Schwell treated me like an intruder. She convinced herself that I existed only to steal her spotlight. And so, she made it her mission to erase me. At first, it was subtle. Every time I picked up a new hobby, she suddenly developed an interest in it too. If I took up archery, she arrived at school the next day with a bow, gushing about how she'd always loved the sport. If I wrote in my diary about a crush, she'd be flirting with the very same boy by lunchtime. My choices weren't my own, they were just drafts for her to copy. But it didn't stop there. She wormed her way into every friendship I formed, seamlessly inserting herself until I was the outsider. If I tried to diet or exercise, she suddenly became a health guru. My identity became a reflection in her distorted mirror, and no matter how much I fought, I couldn't reclaim it. When I tried to explain this to my parents, their responses were infuriatingly dismissive. Sisters imitate each other, they'd say, or, you can't control what interests she develops. They saw our dynamic as a friendly rivalry, something that pushed us both to be better. What they failed to realize was that I wasn't competing. I was suffocating. And yet, in their eyes, she was always the star. No matter how hard I worked, how dedicated I was, she reaped the rewards. I remember my parents skipping work to attend her recitals, yet somehow always forgetting mine. The message was clear, Schwell mattered. I didn't. She reveled in it. She thrived off making me feel small. When our parents were around, her taunts were whispered, her jabs subtle. But when we were alone, the cruelty came out in full force. She'd smirk and tell me I should just disappear because no one would notice if I was gone. That I would always come second. That I was nothing. And worse, she wasn't just cruel with words. At school, she tripped me in crowded hallways, sent me sprawling in front of everyone. When teachers caught on, she played innocent, spinning lies about dares and misunderstandings. And my parents? They took her side every time. Even when she started spreading rumors, sick, twisted lies that painted me as the villain, people believed her. She'd show up with mysterious bruises, telling anyone who would listen that I was the one hurting her. I was the quiet one, the introvert, the girl who didn't explain herself. So, the rumor stuck. High school was hell. And even after she graduated, she found ways to poison my life. When college applications rolled around, I worked hard, earning a full scholarship. My parents should have been proud. Instead, they saw it as an opportunity to redirect my unused college fund to Schwell. After all, she hadn't gotten into any universities on her own. I was furious. I pleaded with them to save my portion, to help me with a business or a future wedding. They scoffed, telling me to learn self-sufficiency. We're done babying you, they said. That night, I cried myself to sleep, realizing, once and for all, that I would always be an afterthought in my own family. So, when I left for college, I made sure I had nothing tying me back home. Not a single reminder. It was during this chapter of my life that I met Fahad. He was everything my childhood wasn't: kind, stable, safe. We met at orientation, and from the first moment, he was warm, understanding. He listened. He didn't judge. Fahad became my anchor. One winter, my parents invited me home for Christmas, hosting a grand family dinner. I didn't want to go alone, so I asked Fahad to come. It would be the first time they met him. I warned him about my family, their coldness, their judgments. He handled it with grace. When we arrived, he greeted them with warmth, even bringing my mother a bouquet. It caught her off guard. She wasn't used to being treated with such sincerity. Over dinner, he charmed everyone, making intelligent conversation, cracking jokes, complimenting the food. Even my cousins whispered to me, nudging my shoulder, saying I was lucky. Does he have a brother? They teased. For the first time, I felt seen. But Schwell? She watched it all, seething. Her face darkened as the night wore on. I saw it in the way she gripped her wine glass, in the sharp, hushed conversation she exchanged with relatives. As the laughter around the table grew, so did her resentment. She wasn't used to being overshadowed. And she wasn't going to let it slide. Schwell's discomfort with Fahad's presence simmered beneath the surface, her expression a tight mask of forced politeness. Throughout dinner, I could feel it, the weight of something unsaid, coiling like a snake ready to strike. And then, without warning, she pounced. "So, are you too serious?" she asked, her voice deliberately loud enough to command the entire table's attention. Conversation stilled. Every pair of eyes turned to me. I met her gaze, unwavering, and slipped my hand into Fahad's. "Yes," I said, my voice firm. "We are." Schwell smirked, her lips curling with the kind of satisfaction that meant she wasn't done yet. "Well," she drawled, swirling the wine in her glass, "maybe you should consider settling down with someone more aligned with our family's traditions. Not an outsider." The air crackled with unspoken shock. A few guests exchanged uneasy glances, shifting in their seats. My parents, for once, looked uncomfortable. I opened my mouth, fury bubbling in my chest, but before I could unleash the words clawing their way up my throat, Fahad spoke. Unfazed, he smiled, a calm, unwavering kind of smile that made Schwell's smirk falter. "I was born and raised here, just like you," he said, his voice steady, each syllable precise. "My great-grandparents came to this country with hope and a dream. They worked hard to build a life, just like yours did. Respecting others' cultures? That's what my family taught me." There was nothing defensive in his tone, only quiet, measured confidence. And that, more than anything, rattled her. I should have been relieved that he had handled it so gracefully, but I wasn't. I was furious that he even had to explain himself. That he had to justify his place at this table when no one else did. The rest of the evening carried a strained tension, thick as smoke. Schwell, clearly aware that she had made a spectacle of herself, spent the remainder of the night nursing her drink, seething in silence. Later, as Fahad and I drove back to college, I sent her a message, a long, blistering message that had been years in the making. I told her I was ashamed to call her my sister. That I wanted nothing to do with her. That from this moment forward, she no longer existed to me. Her reply came swiftly. "Same here." And that was that. I cut her off completely. Fahad and I graduated, built our careers, and 3 years later, we got married. Schwell wasn't invited. My parents, on the other hand, were. They had spent months trying to convince me otherwise, pleading that I reconsider. But I was firm. Schwell would not be part of my new life. The wedding was extravagant, the kind that left people in awe. My mother's wide-eyed admiration was evident, and my father, usually a man of few words, was conspicuously quiet throughout the celebration. It wasn't until they met Fahad's family that I saw the realization dawn on them. Fahad's family was wealthy. Exceptionally so. The event itself had been a testament to that fact, the pristine venue, the dazzling decor, the effortless luxury woven into every detail. My parents took it all in, their expressions shifting from surprise to something unreadable. Later that evening, my mother pulled me aside. She asked about our finances, her voice casual but laced with something deeper. I explained that Fahad and I had built a life together, that while his family was well off, our success was our own. That I, too, earned well. Looking back, I realize now, this was my mistake. Because 2 years later, the calls began. It started with urgency. My parents rang me multiple times in the middle of my workday, knowing full well how busy I was. Something must be wrong, I thought. An emergency. I called them back immediately. My father's voice was unusually gentle. "Can you come over?" he asked. "There's something we need to talk about." That evening, exhausted from work, I arrived at their house to find them waiting anxiously. "We just want to start by saying how grateful we are," my mother began, her smile forced. "For everything you've done for us." A flicker of unease crawled up my spine. Then, she launched into it. Schwell had been married for 2 years. I hadn't even known. But more than that, she had been struggling. Infertility. Failed attempts. And then, finally, a pregnancy. Only for it to end in heartbreak. "She had a miscarriage," my mother whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I sat there, stunned. She's considering IVF now, my father added. But it's expensive. And then, the moment of truth. They wanted me to pay for it. $25,000. They looked at me, hopeful, expectant, as if this were a given. As if this were my duty. My stomach churned. My pulse pounded in my ears. She's your sister, my mother pressed. Family takes care of each other. I exhaled sharply, biting back a bitter laugh. Family? I repeated. Since when? Schwell had spent her entire life making sure I felt like anything but. I told them, firmly, that I wouldn't be gifting her a dime. Their faces darkened. My mother's hopeful expression twisted into something sharper. You don't have children, she said. The least you could do is help bring a grandchild into this family. I felt my control slipping. I forced myself to stay calm. I won't give her the money, I said. But if she needs it that badly, I'll offer a loan. Legally binding. In writing. She pays me back, or I take her to court. My parents recoiled as if I had slapped them. My father's face turned red with anger. My mother gasped, outraged. A contract, she snapped. How could you even suggest that? My father's voice rose. You have more than enough. You're just being selfish. Selfish. That word cut through me like a blade. I stared at them, at these people who had spent years disregarding me, who had ignored my pain, who had always sided with Schwell. And now, after all this time, they felt entitled to my generosity? I stood. My hands were steady, my voice unwavering. I worked for everything I have, I said. You don't get to demand a piece of it. My mother's face twisted in fury. This is why we never like you, she hissed. You've always thought you were better than everyone else. I inhaled slowly. Exhaled. And then, finally, I did what I should have done years ago. I walked out. This time, for good. The weight of guilt they tried to place on me was crushing, but I refused to buckle. A nagging suspicion had been gnawing at me, whispering that something wasn't right. Where had all the money I'd been sending them gone? The thought clawed at me, relentless. I needed answers. Feigning the need for the restroom, I slipped away, heart pounding in my chest. My steps were light as I crept toward my parents' bedroom, each movement measured, careful. There, on the bedside table, was my father's phone, its screen faintly glowing, plugged in and unattended. My conscience wavered for a fraction of a second before my fingers moved on their own. I unlocked the screen, navigating to his messages. My breath caught in my throat. There they were, transaction records. A steady stream of payments. Every month, without fail, $1,800 was sent to my sister. For 2 years. A cold wave of betrayal crashed over me. My skin prickled, my stomach twisted. It wasn't just the money, it was the deception, the calculated dishonesty. I had been nothing more than a pawn in their game, my kindness twisted into a resource they exploited behind my back. I stormed downstairs, fury crackling through my veins. I didn't bother hiding my rage. My voice, sharp as a blade, sliced through the air as I demanded to know where my money had really gone. My parents flinched, startled. Their attempts to feign innocence were pitiful, stammering, stuttering, reaching for excuses that crumbled before they could even take shape. I gave them no escape. I laid out the evidence, pointing straight to the transfers to my sister. The blood drained from their faces. Silence, heavy and damning, hung between us. Then, the truth tumbled out. They had been funneling a huge portion of my money to Schwell, justifying it with the excuse that she needed it more than I did. My hands clenched into fists. I spat back, demanding to know if they ever once felt guilty, if it ever so much as crossed their minds that they were stealing from me, their own daughter, for the sake of the child they had always favored. They scrambled to defend themselves, claiming Schwell and her husband barely made enough to scrape by, while I, with my extravagant wedding and high-paying job, wouldn't even notice the missing money. They confessed that it had been Schwell's idea all along, she had planted the seed, and they had simply gone along with it, convinced they were doing what was best for their children. The rage inside me turned to something icier, sharper. I had endured enough. With a steady, unshakable voice, I declared that I was done. No more financial support. No more manipulation. No more playing their game. Panic flashed across their faces. They sputtered, pleaded, insisting that I couldn't just abandon them, that family was about loyalty, about sacrifice. Their words meant nothing to me anymore. I turned my back on them. As I stepped out of their house, a storm of emotions swirled inside me, anger, sorrow, but also, for the first time in years, a strange sense of freedom. Their calls started almost immediately. Messages, voicemails, all begging me to reconsider. I ignored them. I had made my choice. Update 1. The overwhelming support I've received has been incredible. For so long, I felt alone in my pain, dismissed as overly sensitive or dramatic. But now I feel seen. Believed. I won't lie, there were moments when the guilt clawed at me, whispering that maybe I was being too harsh. But then I would remind myself of the years of manipulation, the lies, the betrayal. My husband, Fahad, has been my rock. He is furious at how my parents used me and has made it clear this will never happen again. Not even if they were on their deathbed. Yet the calls persist. The messages shift between apologies and emotional blackmail, cycling through every tactic they can think of to pull me back in. But I stand firm. I will not waver. Update 2. It had been 2 weeks since my last update when I received a message from someone unexpected, Shell. I didn't even know she had my number. Her message was long, filled with venom. Not an ounce of remorse. She accused me of being selfish, entitled, a spoiled brat hoarding money that should belong to family. She called me a gold digger, sneering that I had only married Fahad for his wealth. Her bitterness oozed from every word. Then came the final blow. She admitted she had despised me her entire life. That she should have bullied me more. That she wanted me to suffer, to never forget what she was capable of. I sat there, phone in hand, shaking. Years of childhood torment resurfaced, a tidal wave of pain. Fahad saw my face, took my phone, and read the message. His fury was instant. Without hesitation, he created a group chat, adding my parents, Shell, and our extended family. Then, he laid everything bare. Screenshots of Shell's words. The evidence of my parents siphoning money to her. The full, unfiltered truth of what they had done to me. And then, all hell broke loose. Within minutes, relatives flooded the chat with outrage. Shock. Disgust. The weight of their collective judgment crashed down on my parents and Shell like an avalanche. The calls started pouring in, not for me, but for them. My parents, frantic, begged me to delete the group, to unsend the messages. But Fahad shut them down without hesitation. He told them, in no uncertain terms, that if they ever came near me for money again, he would unleash every legal resource at his disposal to destroy them. And then, silence. For the first time in my life, Shell and my parents had nothing to say. Through my relatives, I heard whispers of what happened next. My parents were humiliated, forced to finally acknowledge the truth they had long ignored. Shell was not the golden child. She was a bully, a manipulator. And they had enabled her. But it was too late. There was no undoing the years of damage. No erasing the pain they had inflicted. I had already made my choice. Update 3. I want to take a moment to thank every single person who has supported me. I have read your words, and they have given me strength. For the first time in my life, I feel like I am truly free. Fahad and I have decided to seek therapy, to help me heal, to finally close this chapter of my life for good. Not a single message has come from my parents or Shell since Fahad's warning. And I know, deep in my heart, that it will stay that way. The road ahead won't be easy. But for the first time, I'm walking it without the weight of their expectations, their manipulation, their cruelty. I am free. And I will never look back.